So, for those of us who are joining us on the podcast, if you can drop us a note in the chat to see where you guys are calling in from or joining us from, that'd be great. And also, if you have any questions at all during this podcast, please feel free to drop them in the chat as well. So, today we are here to talk about procurement dashboards. And when I started in procurement, dashboards were fledgling at best, right? And basically, if you had some idea of how much money you spent with a supplier or in total, you were there. We were talking about contract repository and cycle times and savings tracking and all the other good stuff that we do today. With the advent of orchestration and with the advent of AI, dashboards are taking a life of their own. So today we're going to talk about the shortcomings of the current dashboards, what the future dashboards should look like, and really what you're trying to get out of those dashboards as you start to look forward. So with that, Roy, how about we jump right into...
That sounds good. Let's make it happen.
So maybe you should talk about some of these things, right? Because this is fairly straightforward stuff. So where do you see dashboards falling short today?
Today, everyone has a dashboard. Literally, everyone has created a dashboard. If you can create a graphic screen, you go, oh, here's your dashboard, and you're colorful. But I've always asked the suppliers, I said, okay, tell me how I'm using this data. How am I going to be able to take actions based upon this activity? Is this just a reactive activity? Can I get into the proactive side of this data? And unfortunately, the significant number of the individuals are saying, hey, listen, this is just presenting what was, and it's pretty stale data in most cases. And you can spend a lot of time on it. And over time, my team did, but still, it just failed in terms of being actionable data that I could present to leadership to be able to say, hey, this is where we're headed. This is why we need resources. This is the results of our activity. It wasn't valuable.
Yeah, I think you're right. And some of the things that we always struggle with is the whole idea of dashboards just being a picture and it's not malleable, right? Like you can't go deep into a specific area. So for example, like it's great that you know that you have 100 suppliers that are considered high inherent risk. But it sure would be nice to know how many of those are in, for example, marketing and have a presence in, I don't know, Southeast Asia, and all of a sudden you can get to something that is actionable, or even better yet, if there's an event that you can actually get to the point of realizing what the impacts are. So for example, if there is a hurricane in Southeast Asia, which of your companies are actually going to potentially be impacted? And that, right. Those are really the cool things. So we talk about strategic questions and being able to interact with the data by applying filters or lenses, as we call them, right? And with that, drive action.
Right. And then there's real-time feeds that you want to be able to utilize effectively that trigger activity that you need to take now. So there, like example, when I was the Chief Procurement Officer at MetLife, we had 18,000 unique suppliers. Obviously, that's 1 million second-tier suppliers that we were trying to figure out how they impacted our requirements. Now, it is a financial services company, so we're not talking manufacturing per se, but still, we could be shut down or negatively impacted. And I wanted to be able to get feeds from risk players and from, even as you mentioned, hurricanes, weather sites. Which of my suppliers are being negatively impacted that I've got to reach out to them? And that's got to be real time. And then be proactive if we can, so that we can be ahead of it versus always finding out on Monday morning that something happened and now we're in trouble.
Yeah. And the other cool thing too, as we're learning and getting into more and more proactive dashboards, like people want to know how many projects are late, how many projects are sitting with legal right now, how many things are sitting on this particular person's desk waiting for action, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But the coolest thing that we worked on was really about the team management within procurement. Because let's say you have 15 people in procurement doing sourcing deals. They're probably working on a couple hundred projects at the same time. And the thing that we always found interesting is double clicking on, for example, a team within procurement and seeing how many projects are they working on, which 2 or 3 resources are the really good workers that get gifted work all the time, because it's always the best people, in my experience, who are the busiest because people want to work with them.
Right.
And just being able to double click on a particular person and seeing, all right, this person's working on 8 projects and this person is responsible for these 10 supplier relationships in this category, all of a sudden you get a really good three-dimensional view of your resources, what they're working on, how busy they are, and also who is not, right? And the other thing that we try to do with the team management dashboards is, some people do this, some people don't do this, but have net promoter scores for their customers, right? At the end of every project, you can say, did you enjoy working with Roy Anderson on this project? 0 to 9 or 1 to 10. And basically say he's doing pretty good. On the savings part, when people hate working with him. And again, like that could be another thing.
You looked into my file, obviously.
I know, right?
One of the things that I really liked about this new solution set is the fact that you start to understand your internal customers. They've always asked, what are you doing for me? How are you? I'm getting a charge because of this overhead structure. You're a part of this charge. Are you doing anything for me? Are you supporting my activity? Now you can go back to the senior level person saying, here's all the contracts that we're supporting your activity. Here's the impact that we've had on those contracts. And here's the internal customer and the sourcing manager that's supporting your activity. So you start building this reputation as being someone that delivers results and can then document that clearly and go through an auditable process so that everyone feels like these aren't made up numbers. This is where it was. This is where we are today. Here's the improvements.
Amazing. Let's go to the next slide. And when we're talking about the dashboards of the future, right? It's not enough anymore to just have a unidimensional data set that just shows you what happened last month, right? And I think as we get into it, like we need to have data that fuel insights that lead to action and then outcomes, and everything is tracked soup to nuts. And I think that's really where we need to get to, where things are basically actionable as and when needed. And you could have a supplier event. For example, you have a supplier failure or a subcontractor failure that could then impact their suppliers, and then say, hey, something happened. Here are the 10 suppliers that could be directly impacted by this failure of a fourth party. Now, here are the actions you should be taking. That is real and that's actionable. What are you seeing out there, Roy, in terms of things you can add to this discussion?
So from the amount of dynamic nature, we've seen, of course, tariffs is in the news every minute. The relationships with our countries, relationships with our suppliers inside of those countries. This is a very dynamic situation. And the idea is a sourcing effort or a contract that's in place is being impacted by these real-time events. Frequently, you get these contracts that sit there for 3 years and no one's really acting on them, even though there's a risk being built inside those contracts that don't get looked at for 3 years. But if you have a holistic view and your portfolio is not only of your sourcing activity today, which is in real-time adjustments and decisions that need to be made, but also the contracts that are in play and how they're being impacted, you want to be able to know when and how you have to take actions in order to mitigate risks that are developing. And having that insight is crucial for you to be able to be responsive and not have to be called in to the CFO or CEO's office and say, why didn't you know about this? Why didn't you take actions on this opportunity? Where what I love to do is be able to say, hey, we have information. This is how it's going to impact you, internal customer. And these are the actions that we suggest to take in order to be able to mitigate the risk before it actually happens. So you are proactive. You're responsive to your internal customer. You can actually create that value proposition that becomes very real and visible to your internal customers and management of the company.
Yeah, one thing we double click a little bit on is the whole idea of role-based, right? So the thing that I always love about starting with a new customer is seeing what they want to see as part of their dashboard, right? Because if you don't really know who your suppliers are, what risks there are, what you're spending, what the opportunities are, knowing about fourth-party suppliers and negative news assessments of fourth parties, it's less relevant for you, right? So you have to crawl, walk, run. So the whole idea of having a role-based view and showing people what is important to them rather than saying this is best in class, that could be very overwhelming for someone who's just starting out. And it's fun to do and see how things progress as people mature into the procurement function.
Yeah, I love the role-based concept because I'll tell you right now, you have a meeting with your finance team, whether it's the budget people up to the CFO, they have a different perspective on the risks and issues that they want to take into consideration. You go into the advertising and marketing group, they have a whole different perspective of what they want to see and the actions they want to take. You get into your audit team, totally different response. Your internal customer or the production line or the engineering teams, the marketing teams, they all have different perspectives and a different view of the exact same contractual situation. So you have to understand their role. And the fun part is as you start to add in more AI visibility into this and the data starts to become more digital, AI can take better action on it. And then as you get to tier 2 and tier 3, which just explode your footprint, you need to have those AI levels and those role-based views in order to be able to be actionable and to get through all the junk to get to those pieces where you can take appropriate action effectively. It also really highlights the need that the supply chain talent needs to grow and develop significantly away from their transactional nature and into more strategic, proactive, forward-looking solutions.
100%. So let's move on to the next slide here, Maya. So what should a dashboard do today? And we're focusing a lot here on negative stuff. So if a KPI is red or risk identifier or cyber event, yeah, we need to definitely action those things too. But this also could be true for, let's say, a savings opportunity shows up or a new project comes in or whatever the case may be, right? So all of these triggers could still be a positive thing, not necessarily a negative thing. And we talk about the whole idea here of something happens and now you have to do something about it. And today, for example, we can come up with corrective actions to say, all right, there is a hurricane in Southeast Asia. Here are your direct suppliers that could be impacted. Here are your second tier suppliers that could be impacted. And hence your first part could trigger an outage. So then what are the corrective actions? You should probably pick up the phone and call somebody or send an email, right? And assign ownership to who needs to follow up and then escalate and those kinds of things, right? So the whole idea now of having a dashboard that sort of just stares at you is not good enough. You actually need to do something when things are happening, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. We tend to spend our time on how do we find negative activity, but actually the golden nugget from that conversation was we need to spend a lot more time on where new information comes in that creates opportunities for innovation, where we have a supplier that has unveiled a new capability, a new solution set. And it is in those, not only your first tier, but your second tier suppliers that are saying, I've got something new. And if you don't see it, obviously you can't favorably impact your internal customers. But as you start to get those feeds of information, not about just negative, but all the new positive innovation things, which realistically, I think is the 70, 80%. The 10, 20% is the negatives. The 80% is the possibility of being more innovative with your supply chain. And as I tell my class all the time, I said, for every revenue dollar, anywhere from 40 to 70% of that revenue dollar is going to your suppliers. That means you need your suppliers to be more innovative and be the source of an innovation engine that's going to be able to feed your engineering groups, your production groups, your design groups, your R&D groups, because that's where your innovation is going to come from. So we need to spend more time on the positives, the opportunities, the innovation of this dashboard solution.
Yep, 100%. And the last bullet point, last two actually, is dynamic feedback loops and surfacing bottlenecks. So one of the things that we do a lot of focal point is process, obviously, right? But in every organization, there's always the folks that are not all that expeditious in executing tasks, right? So the whole idea of why does a sourcing process take X amount of time, being able to lay that out in a dashboard way and say legal 80% of the time takes this long and henceforth they're on the critical path, and being able to identify where things are. And I think having the ability to have a visual that says we had 200 projects last year and on average, this is how long it takes by gate, by stakeholder. It's a very powerful thing. And it's not anecdotal anymore because you actually have the underlying data to support it and you can actually make it look pretty whiz bang, right? So it's pretty cool. And
yeah, I think the idea of bottlenecks, your internal customer thinks that they say, okay, I'm being told I need to use this sourcing function, or they got an audit hit because they don't utilize that sourcing capability the way they should. And then it goes into this black hole. And they go, how long? Why does it take 3 months to get something done? I could have gotten it done by next Monday by just calling my friend and the supplier and coming to an agreement. So they see this hole and they think it's all the sourcing team doing the work. But in actuality, once you go through the process, you have risk reviews and audit reviews and legal reviews that all take time to make it a much better solution. Yeah. But we all have to realize that process has to be both visible to the internal customer so they see it, also visible in terms of the value that's created, and be very reasonable in saying, this is taking too long, but now we can target the areas that take the time. What actions can we take to speed that up or to eliminate it entirely? Concepts I've always used is simplify, eliminate, automate. Simplify the process and not do the steps because you've now digitized it, so you don't need to do the manual steps. Eliminate all those things that don't add value and then automate the entire structure so that it can be fast.
Yep. Hallelujah. If we eliminated all the nonsense, it would be free up a lot of time. Yeah. So we're going to jump into a couple of examples of reporting now. And ironically, this is not one of ours. This is a Rapid Ratings financial stability assessment of a specific supplier. And I like this because it tells you everything that you need to know on one slide. Shout out to Rapid Ratings for this one, right? But here you can see that a supplier is being evaluated and the financial health rating is green and it's right in line with the sector average. So that's really good. And the same thing here with the core health score. Again, really good, in line with expectations of the sector. And I like the visual on the right because it tells you whether a supplier is an A, B, C, or D. And basically, the whole idea here is if it's not, let's say that you have a fairly advanced risk program, and you can say if a supplier shows up in C or D, then you need to trigger a workflow to do a secondary review. Maybe you collect balance sheet and income statements from the supplier for your own propeller heads to look at it, right? So to me, this is a great example of once you actually get to learn what you're looking at here, it's very easy to say, yeah, this provides value. And I don't really have a lot of improvement opportunities for these guys. It's a great partnership for us. We love dealing with them, but it's a great piece of work right here.
Well, what I like about Focal Point is that it's an open system and the fact that it can take data from third parties and present it versus being just internal only activity. This adds value.
All right. So then we're going to go into a customer report that we built for a customer. So this is the third-party risk management dashboard, right? And you can see here you have 6 widgets. You have the first widget on the top left-hand corner shows you the distribution of the 20 suppliers between the risk categories, right? So red is bad, right? And orange, not so good. Green and yellow are okay, right? So this is inherent risk in terms of high, medium, low, and high. And then you can see the InfoSec posture of the suppliers on the bottom left, the privacy risk posture on the next one, and then you have legal risk, and then you have financial risk. So basically, it's a risk dashboard where you can look at things and you look at the distribution of where you potentially could have risk, right? So just because somebody's inherent risk score is high doesn't mean that they're a risky supplier. It just means that they are performing risky stuff, right? That you probably need to monitor, right? So again, this is what the customer wanted to see. And we are performing inherent risk and follow up on InfoSec, on privacy, on legal risk, and all those kinds of things, so that the risk propeller head can have a look and see what actions need to be taken. Nothing super sexy here. It's a lot of underlying data that goes underneath. But if you click one down, you click on that red top left-hand corner thing, and you get to see, okay, who are my top 2 suppliers that are critical, right? And here you can see, again, this is fake data, right? We sort of just took it. But if you double click on that, now you get to see who the 2 suppliers are. You get to see the total annual spend. You get to see how many contracts you have with them. And then you get to see who the supplier owner is, and you get to see the status of the supplier, right? And of course, if you click further into this, you can see everything that's moving with these 2 suppliers. You can see how many projects they're engaged in. You can see how many contracts that are coming up for renewal. You can see when their next QBR is, like all those kinds of things. So it becomes really deep, and you can go into the minute details of the specific supplier. And again, it starts with the dashboard, and then you go deep. And if you then clicked on the next one, and you can then see, if you clicked on the InfoSec posture ones, then you get to see, all right, those suppliers that had a red InfoSec posture, how are they looking overall? So you get to see here, to the extent to which you have SOC 2s or you have an ISO 27001, how many of them are current, how many of them are expired, how many of them are coming up for renewal. And again, the ones that are yellow and red, there's an action that needs to be taken relatively quickly. So with Focal Point, obviously, if you're yellow, we would then say automatically ask the supplier to update their information. But if it turns red, you probably need to do more manual follow-ups. Again, you make it very actionable, and you follow up where you have to follow up. Again, this is just, I don't want to do a click through of the system. It's about to show you the art of the possible. Any comments, questions, concern with that?
No, I love what I like in this scenario is the fact that I can see myself sitting down with my internal customer and being able to show their role, showing, hey, you own this type of activity. You're one of 3 customers for this supplier. The supplier is getting into difficulties. We suggest that we put this out to bid, finding a second supplier or move the work entirely over to another supplier base or supplier footprint in order to minimize this risk that you have. So now you can drill into any of the suppliers of that internal customer. How big of a player are they? Are they the small fish in the bigger pond, or are they the Goliath that's actually driving most of the spend? And then how do we take actions in order to get better results, better innovation, lower risk, better cost structures for them, the internal customer? Having that at our fingertips makes the procurement, the supply chain data come alive for the internal customer.
As we nerd out on some of these things, right? Like one of the things that I love doing with customers that are signing up for our supplier management platform is the whole idea of risk with second tier suppliers. Because basically, you'll be amazed how many of your suppliers use AWS or Azure or Google, and you don't have direct relationships with those suppliers, right? So having the idea of concentration risk with second tier suppliers just really interesting. And it's something that we really enjoy doing, because to me, as an old guy doing procurement now, it's amazing information that you can get even with organizations that you don't have relationships with. Mm-hmm. And without a dashboard, it's hard to get this. So this last slide of the day here is going to be our sales shtick, right? So how do we fit into this? What I would like to say here is the value of the dashboard is not really what it shows, but what the hell you can do with it. And as you look at a supplier or a stakeholder or a category, right? The whole idea of being able to see everything that's moving within that category, supplier or stakeholder, and how are you going to interact with that system? How are you going to interact with that data so you can figure out how to save money, mitigate risk, get real work done, and track progress against it. And the whole idea here is stop looking in the rearview mirror and move towards continuous improvement so you can actually add value to the business. And that's why we started the company. We love doing this stuff, right? As you can tell, we are procurement people throughout, are nerdy about it. Anything to add to that, Roy?
What I find really interesting is you understand the people putting it together, where are they coming from? Are they the science people? Are they the data people? Are they the process flow people? Or are they actually the former users that had real problems to solve, and how do they go about solving it? And the results are very different. And you can understand when something's being developed by a person that ran into these problems and needed a solution for it, all of a sudden you find the tools that they develop create solutions that work. So I just get a kick out of it. And I love having former procurement types driving these types of solutions.
All right. But we wouldn't let you guys go until we plug the next episode, which is on February 18th. So there's 2 QR codes here. One is to register for the next episode. And we also have some homework for people who care to do this, right? So the second QR code is a link to a procurement dashboard and the effectiveness scorecard. So basically, you get to download this information for yourself. and see how well you guys are doing in your organization on best-in-class procurement dashboards and deriving actions therefrom. So, guys, as always, my name is Anders. You can find me on LinkedIn and all the socials. And Jeremy, I'm pretty sure we can make this available to you. We'll get Maya to do that. And yeah, guys, please reach out to me directly, either on LinkedIn or email. And Roy, thanks again for spending another perfectly good half hour with me. You probably could have used it much more productive elsewhere. But thanks, everybody.